Hello and welcome to Occupied Thoughts, a podcast brought to you by the Foundation for Middle East Peace. I'm Peter Beinart, a fellow at the Foundation. Today is May 30th, 2025, and I'm delighted to be here again with Dr. Feroze Sidhwa. Dr. Sidhwa is a general trauma and critical care surgeon in California. He's also a humanitarian surgeon, having worked most extensively in Palestine, but also in Ukraine, Haiti, Zimbabwe, and Burkina Faso. He most recently volunteered at the European Hospital in Khan Yunis, Gaza, from May to April 2024 with the World Health Organization, and again for the month of March 2025 with the American NGO Med Global. Feroze, thank you so much for doing this.
No, thanks for inviting me. Appreciate it.
So maybe we could start by just you talking a little bit about how you got into this extraordinary work of basically going and taking your skills as a doctor to all of these war-torn places, and maybe then also particularly about your connection to Palestine and Israel in particular.
Yeah, no, you bet. I grew up in Flint, Michigan, and my parents are Parsi immigrants from Pakistan, so they're part of a small ethnic and religious minority there. My dad is a physician; he's a gynecologist, but it was hard for him to actually work. As Pakistan became more radicalized, it became harder for non-Muslims to be professionals there. So he went to Britain with my mom, and they lived there for 9 years. My brother was born there, and then they came to the States, and I was born here. And then after, so my dad's a doctor. So when I went to college, I thought I'll be a doctor because I didn't know any other professions existed. And when I got to college, it was 2000, and in October of 2000, the Second Intifada breaks out. It was the big thing on campus. I had some friends in Amnesty International, so I just went to a meeting with them because I figured, well, not? I didn't know anything about the conflict or anything like that. Um, and given my parents' background, they're not the most they're fairly Islamophobic people. I think it's fair to say. But again, that's their lived experience. I can't really blame them for it. And the so yeah, so I got involved in the Israel-Palestine conflict just because it was kind of the big thing on campus. But then 9/11 happens the next year, invasion of Afghanistan, invasion of Iraq. So my time in college was a pretty tumultuous time in the United States, and the world. It was the beginning of the war on terror. So after that experience in college, I guess you could say, I was like, oh, should I be a doctor? I'm not sure. So I went and lived in Israel. I lived in Haifa for about a year. I think it was 9 or 10 months. I can't remember now. It was a long time ago. Um, and I worked with an Arab Jewish cooperative called Itija. It doesn't exist anymore. And Because Haifa is Israel's only mixed city, so it would try to solve intercommunal problems there. It didn't do anything with the conflict itself. And it was funded by some church in Norway. I can't remember. That was my job. My only job was to communicate with this church. But the but while I was there, I would tour around in the West Bank, and I was in Hebron. I'm almost sure I was at Achley Hospital, but I didn't know anything about medicine back then. I hadn't gone to med school yet. So, and I met a guy from Physicians for Human Rights Israel there, PHR Israel, and I just remember he took me aside and he was like, Feroz, if you want to be a doctor, look at how these people live and look at what they have to go through. And if you would be a doctor but still have to live like them, he was talking about the Palestinians. If because they don't get the doctors in Palestine don't have special privileges compared to everybody else. They're respected in their own society, but not the Israelis will still beat the shit out of them or kill their kids or build their house up. It doesn't matter. So he was like, if you would live like they have to be and still be a doctor, then go be a doctor. And so I understood what he was saying, but at the same time, like I'm the wealthy first world outsider coming in. I'm more like him, in other words. Like I'm more the person who like because when I didn't think about it at the time, but later when I considered what he had said, I thought to myself, this guy could criticize occupation policy from his living room, and no one would care. Oh, he's just some leftist. Ignore him. He can go out in the street and demonstrate. Nobody cares. Um, but to go into the territories and to stand with the Palestinians, whom not just his government, but really the wider society insists are, just barely human beings. Um, that probably cost him. That probably cost him social relationships, probably jobs, probably money, probably, prestige. And that was what I kind of thought to myself, that's the choice I have to make. And So anyway, so that was and there were other experiences there too. But so basically I decided to be a doctor in Palestine. And so when I got the opportunity to go back and volunteer there more, I did. You know, I also like after my first year of med school, I went and worked in a hospital in Hebron for 6 weeks. That was at Achley Hospital, and I worked on the Palestine medical the PMRS Palestine Medical Relief Society has mobile clinics that go around the hills of Hebron, which even back then were a total disaster. This was 2006 or no 2007. Um, and I lived with the Abu Hashash family in Hebron while I was there. So you know those kinds of experiences they tie you to a place a little bit. Like oh actually, it's nice. My glass I don't know if you can see it is from the Taipei Brewery
Ah,
and
okay.
you know
Uh,
like it's the so these experiences tie you to this place a little bit and you've been there yeah and you've spent a lot of your time talking about Israel and Palestine obviously there's something unusual about the treatment of the Palestinians that's you know when you're younger especially it's hard for me to put my finger on it but once you've even one I still remember my first trip to Hebron it's it's pretty hard to ignore what's going on. Like have you been there? Yeah.
yes, yes,
You so
yes,
you've
yes.
walked around the old city, the walled city. It's you know you get there and you're like I had read a lot about the conflict. I was editing a book on it at the time. It was when it was Norman Finkelstein's book Beyond Chutzpah,
Mm,
and so I knew a lot of, and that book is mostly about the human rights dimension of the conflict. So I've read all the, I had up to that point, I had read all of the reports that Selim had ever written in English. I had read everything Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International had written in English. And so I knew, like, you know, I knew it up here, but to see it and
mhm.
to just look around and be like, what on earth is happening in this? This is insane. I had no idea it was actually, it's shocking. Like it's just so shocking. And it's different so from, you know, Ukraine or Zimbabwe, where like Zimbabwe is desperately poor and comes out of a horrendous history of apartheid. Okay, fine. It's a messed up place. Haiti comes out of a miserable history of imperial aggression and blah blah blah. It's a miserable place. This is a little bit it's ongoing, it's right in your face, and it's so deeply inhumane. You know, and then on I don't know, there's something else about it. It's just weird. Like you kind of look, or if you're not Israeli or Palestinian, you can't tell who's who just by looking at them. You know,
Mhm,
like,
mhm,
I mean,
mhm.
like Orthodox Jews or something, of course. But like
Right.
you know, it's you're like guys, I think you're all the same people here. I'm not sure
Mm,
why you're so mad at each other. Like, how are you even making these distinctions between each other? You know, the
yeah.
and I knew people who worked in the in Rwanda during the massacres in 1996 and they said there was something about it for them too. They said like we can't even tell who's Hutu and who's Tutsi.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
why
Yeah.
are they slaughtering? You know, it makes it hard for your brain to comprehend it. You know, so
Yeah.
anyway, so
Mm,
that's how I got involved in both doing this kind of work and in Gaza specifically. Yeah.
mm. So maybe I could start by asking you, you've been there twice, in the spring of 2024, and
hmm
then just very recently in just just in the spring of this year. Um,
hmm
what was different about what you saw in Gaza in early 2024 versus this year?
Yeah, so a few things. From this kind of from the technical standpoint of working as a physician, when I went to European hospital, this is the first trip a year ago. When I went to European hospital, all of the hospitals in Gaza were functioning as DP camps, like displaced persons camps, and not just the grounds of the hospital, literally the hallways were lined with tents. By the day I got there, you could still walk from one side of the hospital to the other on the first, second, and third floor. By the time I left, you couldn't even walk all the way across the hospital.
Wow.
Because people had not like it wasn't just the right side and the left side. Someone was like, "Well, I'm taking the middle now," and this is you know, and it's not. I mean, you know, you can you can see why somebody would do this. You know, I mean, you got to live somewhere. Your kids have to live somewhere, and it's better to live inside than outside. Um, but so there were 10 to 15,000 people sheltering on the grounds of the hospital. The grounds had the hospital had a fairly large campus. It was quite pretty, and on the I think southern end was European Hospital. I think the northeastern end was the Palestine College of Nursing, but but within the hospital there were like 1,500 people living. which is obviously just totally putting a huge strain. Like the hospitals, even just its sewage system is not meant to handle this many people. Using the bathroom in there, the water system, which was already drained because there's no water coming into Gaza. So it's, in other words, it's only the hospital's wells that are actually producing water, so it can't produce water fast enough, can't filter it fast enough. So in other words, the hospital was just extremely stressed when I was there, as even just as a local institution. But at the same time, during that time, the Battle of Khan Yunis was going on, and aid was still coming in through Rafah. So people, uh, Gaza, it's important for people to remember, Gaza has been hungry since about 2004. It's not a new fun. It's certainly kicked up to extreme levels now. But Gaza has been hungry since 2004. The kids are stunted. Anemia is very common. Vitamin A deficiency is very common. Um, these were pre-existing problems, and they were still there, obviously, but the acute level of malnutrition was less common, for sure. I did see two children who, and I don't mean to make an imprudent analogy, but really looked like they came out of Auschwitz. But that was not common. Everybody had lost weight. Everybody everybody when I left, they would take their phone and they'd say, "Don't remember me like this. Remember me like this. This is what I used to look like," you know. And you could see their cheeks had sunken in, especially people who had been taken prisoner, which was a lot. Their cheeks had sunken in. They'd lost a lot of muscle mass. You know, anytime I would put my hand on someone's, I tend to pat people. You can't touch men, don't touch women there, obviously, but I tend to pat people on the back, and every time I did, my hand would just fall into their spine. You know what I mean? Like there's no, just not much muscle left on them. But so
And this
that
was the
was
first time. This was in
yeah,
2020.
this was the first time, yes. So it was, even though people weren't dying of malnutrition in front of me, there were people in northern Gaza who probably were, but even though they weren't dying, it was the effect of the malnutrition was very obvious. And I don't have to explain it obviously, but like malnutrition isn't like, oh, the border's closed, now we're all going to die of starvation. It takes time, you know. Like a human being without a normally nourished human being without any food, literally with zero food, will still survive about 40 to 60 days. So these things take some time. And obviously malnutrition is never distributed equally across an entire population. But anyway, so that was the first time. And then, because the hospital was such a disaster, it was, it's impossible to keep anything clean. Like every wound, every single incision I made got infected, 100% of them, which is completely insane. Like that's not a common thing. And that was a combination of, well, it wasn't just how dirty the hospital was, but also the fact that people are malnourished, the fact that we can't, we don't have the right antibiotics. We can't test wounds for which kind of bacteria is actually growing in them. So we just have to use this broad spectrum of antibiotics, which just means you're increasing bacterial resistance and all sorts of, blah, blah, blah. But, but the other thing, and I wrote about this. I knew you write for the New York Times a lot. I wrote about this in the Times last October. Was while I was there, and this was something that made quite an impression on me when I got back and thought about it a little bit. Was every day, on average, every day I was there, I saw a kid shot in the head or the chest, and I mean like small children, like 12 and under, not 17 and a half year old boys, in other words. And that's because there were Israeli troops in Khan Yunis, because European hospitals on the eastern edge of the city near the buffer zone. So there were troops coming from the east and from the north, kind of trying to pinch the city off so that people wouldn't be able to move east and west in the city. And and yeah, I mean that was a pretty shocking thing to see. But so when I went back a year later,
And can I just ask,
um,
please, did
yeah.
did they did the kids or the parents ever say anything about the circumstances? I mean, one could imagine, obviously, the
Yeah.
circumstances in which a kid would be shot in the head, but did they say this is what happened to how this happened?
Yeah, so I don't speak Arabic, so I always
Mm.
relied on translators. But
Right,
any and truth be told, I usually didn't ask because it doesn't
right,
matter. I'm just
right,
trying to
right.
keep this kid alive.
Yes, yes,
But there were times when I would meet the family, or let me say it differently. I wouldn't ask in the trauma bay, like the
right,
instant, like
sure.
I want to make sure this kid is going to live. And most of these kids, if when a kid gets hit really when anybody gets hit in the head with a high velocity bullet, the brain damage is very severe. Usually they're unconscious by the time they get to the hospital, and what's happening is their brain is swelling. Because it's not like a blunt injury to the brain. It's a penetrating injury is different. Their brain is swelling up. They're usually not bleeding all that badly inside their head. They might be, but that's not the most common thing. And usually those people will actually go on to die over the next 2 or 3 days. Now, if they were just left on the floor, they would die that day, maybe like an hour later or something. But the way they die is that they herniate their brain, or enough of their brain dies that their brain stops telling their body to breathe, right? That's why, for example, somebody who commits suicide by shooting themselves in the head might be an organ donor. In other words, you don't just die instantly because a bullet hits you in the head. So when these kids would often we would put a breathing tube down and ventilate them, and because they're children, they're very like robust physiologically. We'll get their heart restarted, we'll get them going, and but their brain is still devastated. Then there's not much you can do about that. Um, so we would put them in the ICU and we would do a CT scan. It would be perfectly obvious there's no way this kid is going to survive. We would tell their family that, but they don't really have a concept of of withdrawal of care in Palestine. Honestly, in most of the world, they don't. It's something we have here because we had to develop it because of transplantation and stuff like that. But so basically we do everything we can, which is basically just in other words, we're not going to just pull this breathing tube out of this kid. We're going to wait until he dies of sepsis. The only good thing being that he or she can't feel it. But so when I would meet the parents in that circumstance, I would sometimes ask them what happened, and universally there was one answer, or there were two answers. They were playing inside or they were playing outside. That was it. You know, the I never want, and people sometimes wonder, but I never once heard like um the Hamas. I never heard it was a crossfire. I never heard, and again, to be fair, I didn't interrogate them about this. I just asked, "Do you know what happened?" And I accepted their answer, and then I went on because I'm basically telling them their kid is going to die. But but I never heard it was a crossfire. I never heard it was, Hamas ran in and grabbed our kid and then ran outside and started spraying machine gun fire, um, which I actually heard some Israeli spokesperson claim today. Um, it was just that they were playing. A lot of them were shot by drones. They had the Israelis had, there are these large fixed wing drones like the Reaper drones that we're used to thinking about. But the Israelis also have these things. I'm sure they have like an Israeli, like an Elbit, or an Israeli military industries designation. But the Palestinians just call them quadcopters because they're like the drones your kid will play with. They're just a little bit larger and more robust. And they have guns mounted on them. Yeah, or some of them do. Some of them have speakers. Some of them have explosives. Apparently, they're kind of all over the place. But they're extremely agile. The video I've seen a few videos of them that are just like you're like, wow, they really maneuver quickly. And one thing that's not really known is whether or not they're actually human operated or not. Whether they AI operated, or nobody knows, obviously. But the way the Palestinians describe them shooting kids like through a window or through a doorway, is that they appear and fire like instantly, which just kind of makes you wonder if a human being could do that. And it'll be like shoot, 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 like, and like all four kids in the room will get shot in the head at the same time, and then the thing just disappears instantly, which is sorry, these aren't pleasant things to hear, but um, so you kind of wonder, like, is it? It seems unlikely that a human being would be that good at targeting, but who knows? I mean, I don't have the slightest idea. Um, but yeah, so anyway, so the second time I went, I actually didn't see. I can't. I haven't gone through my journal yet, but to see if I did. But I'm pretty sure I didn't see any children shot in the head the second time I went. And I think the reason is just there were no ground troops in Khan Yunis. It's not these small drones don't have like a 100 mile range. They probably have
Oh,
like a
so they have
20.
to be nearby troops who are on the ground.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. They're apparently I'm trying to remember what the name of the Elbit drone is, but Elbit Systems is the main Israeli drone manufacturer, or I should say the main U.S. Israeli drone manufacturer. And some of their larger, like fixed wing drones, have banks of these smaller drones on the back, apparently. Um, and then, but also these drones are carried by troops, like they are in Ukraine, or like with Ukrainian and Russian forces, things like, or probably our own forces. And so they can be launched by individuals as well, but they don't have, like, they can't fly from like Tel Aviv down to Gaza. Like
Right,
they'll run out of
right,
batteries,
right.
So the so yeah, so they're really only gonna those things are really only gonna happen when they're close by. Um and yeah, yeah.
Wow. So, okay, so just to go back to the mix, so basically what you saw that in terms of was that there was some malnutrition, but not maybe outright starvation, and then there were all these gunshot wounds to the head of kids. And then
Yeah.
what was different when you came back, this year?
Yeah, so I went back during the ceasefire, which, started on January 19th,
Mhm.
was when it was implemented, the day before inauguration for obvious reasons. And so when I went there, I got there on March 6th, and so from March 6th to March 18th, the ceasefire was still on. Now, the Israelis were still shooting people fairly regularly. And there was also a kind of a family, like an interscene clan dispute between two families going on in Khan Yunis. So we were getting gunshot wounds from that too. But basically, the trauma during that time was basically kind of like a busy day in California, like where I work in California, in Stockton. It was like a busy day there, but it wasn't some overwhelming, totally undoable thing. We were just okay, tired at the end of the day, no big deal. I don't think I ever woke up at night to take care of a trauma patient. The Palestinians did, but they just weren't so overwhelmed that they needed volunteer help, you know?
Whereas when you had been there in 2024, it was that way.
It was continuous, yes, just an absolutely in 2024, the hospital never stopped shaking from bombardment. There was never more than a few minutes where I didn't hear a burst of gunfire. There was never a moment there when there weren't. The only time the drones overhead disappeared was April 1st, and I still remember I went out. There was a little balcony at the living quarters, and I went outside and said, "Holy shit, the drones are gone. The war must be over." It was the day the World Central Kitchen killings happened, and they just didn't want any more bad press by somebody actually accidentally pulling the trigger in the wrong way.
Wow.
But they were back 12 hours later. And so yeah, so those were yeah, it was a continuous mass casualty event the first time. When I went back from March 6th to March 18th, it was just a busy day each day. That was it. Which is fine. No, that's what I'm used to. But then when the ceasefire was broken, and in terms of malnutrition, it was way worse. Um, Everybody was visibly thin. People were people would sleep, and to be fair, it was Ramadan, so people's schedules are a little weird anyway during that time, but people would sleep, I mean, until 2 or 3 o'clock sometimes. It was people were having a hard time finding food even then, because you got to remember it was ceasefire time, but on March 2nd, like I said, so January, I know the people are probably getting tired of dates, but January 19th ceasefire, March 2nd reimposition of total blockade of Gaza. I arrive on March 6th, so 4 days later. That day I ate meat with dinner. It was rice with goat or something like that. And I don't really care about not eating meat, but like it's a meat eating culture, and like it's Ramadan, so the meals are usually elevated and quite rich, meat, chicken, whatever people can find. From that day until I think it was March 28th or 29th, somebody found a chicken that day that they served us, but that was it. Otherwise, we ate rice and lentils or rice and fava beans the entire time. Um, which again, I'm fine with, but it's because for me it's temporary, it's no big deal. But it just shows you what a difficulty it was finding. And we were Westerners. I had hundreds and hundreds of dollars with me. If somebody had been like, "Yeah, we can buy a cow," okay, here you go. But this just wasn't available. You know what I mean? Eggs there was a market right outside the wall of the hospital. Eggs when I got there. So again, just 4 days after I mean, that was probably 6 days after the imposition of the blockade again. Eggs were already 50 cents each, like 50 cents, not, like what, like one shekel basically, half a shekel to 1 shekel. And uh, by the time I left, the last time I walked through the market was probably March 28th or 29th. They were almost $3. They were like over $2 each.
Wow.
Which of course, when nobody has any money left,
Right.
I mean, it's completely impossible. So the level and also the widespreadness, the yeah, you understand.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes English fails me. But the how widespread the starvation was and the level of it was far more extreme when I went back this time than the first time. And then on March 18th, when the ceasefire was broken, Israel carried out an enormous bombing campaign, almost entirely directed at civil servants in Gaza, which is just outrageous. But during that, that was the biggest mass casualty event I've ever seen, and I think it might actually be the biggest mass casualty event that has ever taken place on Earth. And I mean that seriously. Like I was a resident during the Boston Marathon bombing, and back in 2013, and if you combine Boston has 6 level 1 trauma centers. if you combine all of them into one hospital, just make believe, that hospital has about 4,000 beds, I think about 400 operating rooms, about 300 or 400 trauma capable surgeons, all sorts of bells and whistles, every subspecialty you can imagine, right? That whole system together saw 129 patients on Marathon Bombing Day, on Patriots Day 2013. Um, if you look at just Nasser Hospital, where I was, that hospital really has 250 beds. It does have an extra 200 tent beds, which aren't real beds. They're just like literally a place for, they are a cot. And there's no electricity, there's no oxygen, there's nothing out there. But nevertheless, let's just say it's a 450 bed hospital. So it's 1/10 the size of the Boston hospitals. 6 or 7 surgeons on a call, 6 operating rooms, and no subspecialists to speak of. Just on the morning of March 18th, we saw 221 patients, half of whom were seriously injured children. So yeah, like the degree, the mismatch of resources to needs is just astonishing. I mean, it's just, incredible difference. So that was the big difference. And then from then on, because it was just a constant flow of injured, um, from explosions. I don't, after that, I rarely saw shootings after that. They came in, I'm sure, but it wasn't a major thing. The main thing was the
Because in this point, it wasn't that the Israeli troops were on the ground in Khan Yunis; they were just bombing from the air.
exactly. Israeli troops had started to move east. So I guess I should have set it up better. Khan Yunis, or European hospital, is on the eastern edge of Khan Yunis, near the buffers, or in the buffer zone with Israel. Whereas Nasser Medical Complex, where I was the second time, is on the western edge, closer to the sea. It's about maybe a 1.5 kilometers from the ocean. So the Israelis weren't in the Mawasi, the strip of beach that's there, where people are being pushed to. The Israelis weren't in that area; they were just bombing it. So basically everything was explosive injuries. Yeah.
Mm. And I'm just curious, in terms of your ability to get in to Gaza and also to bring in, medical supplies or those kind of things, what was that like in 2024 versus 2025?
Yeah, it was a big difference actually. The In 2024 we flew to Cairo and then went across the Sinai and went in through the Rafah Gate. And at that point, we could basically take whatever we could carry. I basically had a full van of supplies. Mark Perlmutter had a full van of supplies, and almost everybody that came on the trip had brought like hundreds and hundreds of pounds of supplies each. I think it was like 1,100 pounds if I remember correctly. Um, and Mark brought like 700 pounds just of orthopedic implants, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, we could bring in almost whatever we want. And also nobody was rejected from the trip. One guy broke his foot when he landed at Cairo airport, so he had to tap out. But nobody was rejected because the Egyptians had no reason to do that. Um, and now, because Rafah's been destroyed, the Rafah gate is closed. Now everything has to go through Israel. So you fly to Amman in Jordan. You go over to the King Hussein Bridge, cross over to the Allenby checkpoint, and then go into the West Bank. And because of that, the Israelis say, well, we have to have security, as if any of the doctors that the World Health Organization is bringing are a security threat. So now about half of healthcare workers are rejected at the border. That are not at the border isn't quite accurate. Everybody gets what Kogat calls pre-approval 3 months ahead of time. And then you have to show up in Amman. You've already taken a month off of work. You've already flown there. You've told your family you love them in case you get killed there, blah, blah, blah. Like it's not the most stress-free process, to be honest. And you get there, and then literally 6 to 12 hours before you're going to cross in, you get final approval based on absolutely nothing. I mean, there's no rhyme or reason to it at all. Like in my trip with Med Global, there were 5 healthcare workers that were going to go. Uh, I and I don't say this to brag. I think it's subjectively correct. I'm pretty sure I'm the most well-known physician in the United States who has gone to the Gaza Strip and then spoken about it publicly. I was let in. Tammy Abu Ghanaim is probably the second most well-known. Either her or Thayer Ahmed, one of the two. She was let in. John Kaler, who is a 78-year-old pediatrician with 2 fake knees, was rejected. Bing Lee, who is a 100-pound Chinese American woman and an American Army veteran, was rejected. And Wilhelmi Masi, a Tanzanian American immigrant citizen who has been, and all three of them have been in Gaza before, and obviously did not cause any security problems. All three of them were rejected. No explanation is given. You can ask for it, but they don't care. There's no explanation given. And the crazy thing is that plenty of people uh, kind of refuse to accept this, so they stick around. They say, "No, put my name in for next week," and the next week they're approved. Like, well,
Wow.
what security considerations changed between
Right.
this week and today? This is
Right.
ridiculous.
Right.
And
Right.
then on top of that, you can't take any supplies. Mark Perlmutter's a hand surgeon from North Carolina. You probably heard his name before. He and I met in Cairo on our first
Mhm.
trip there. And then we went back together. He went with a different organization, but we were there at the same time. And Mark's he brought in microsurgical instruments because he's a hand surgeon, so he does a lot of like nerve reconstruction and stuff like that. You need very, very fine instruments for this and very, very fine sutures. The Israelis just took them. And so how are these a surgical instrument that's this big, I suppose could be used as shrapnel, but this guy is a Jewish American hand surgeon going in. You really think he's like coordinating with Hamas to bring one piece of metal? Like it's looting, you know what I mean? Like it's so dumb that you kind of like he and I were laughing about it. It's just like it's so stupid. It strikes you as being like so petty and ridiculous. And you have to remember these are uniformed Israeli security personnel doing this. Like that means that the state of Israel has decided that there is no more pressing security threat than Mark Perlmutter bringing in his. Like, this is, it's absurd. They actually used to be even worse about this until we started making us think about it. I swear to God, I'm not making this up. They used to take, if you brought a bottle of Tylenol, just say, they would empty the bottle out and they would say, "You're going to be here for 18 days. This is how much Tylenol you need. You can't take the rest." Well, how could pills possibly be? Yeah, it's just outrageous. So this is so yeah. So but anyway, now physicians can't even take anything of value for their own work in, which is it's pretty shocking.
Mm.
Um, and I don't know if you remember, but it was the Sunday after my Times article came out. So like I don't know, October 10th or 11th or 12th, something like that last year. Blinken and Austin sent Dermer and Gallant, the strategic affairs and the defense minister at the time, sent them a letter. In which they actually specifically they didn't name these specific restrictions, but they said that one of the criteria that Israel had to meet if it wanted to continue receiving U.S. weapons, was that they had to lift I think they called them overly onerous restrictions or something like that on medical teams coming in. That was like that would have been like just to be crude, Israel can still kill every single person in Gaza just because they like me taking medical supplies and does not stop them from doing that, right? It doesn't even impact their objective, no matter what their objective is, and it's obvious that there's no security concern. So, but that was like the easiest possible thing for them to like, oh look, we can make Joe Biden happy. They didn't even do that. They just refused to do it. I couldn't believe it. I was actually shocked. Right after that letter was when they banned I forget if it was five or six NGOs, Western NGOs, from going to Gaza at all, including the one I'd gone with for the first time, the Palestinian American Medical Association. Um, they unbanned them a few weeks later, but like it's just it's kind of outrageous, the level of just weird pettiness about what gets to like who gets to go into Gaza, when do Gazan people get to eat, when do they get to drink, where do they get to go to the bathroom? It's just pretty nuts.
Was there one particular conversation from your visit that has really stuck with you, your most recent visit?
Yeah, I mean, certainly a few, but one I just sometimes the magnitude of what's been done to Gaza and like the weight that it has on these, you got to remember, Gaza's half children, right? So literally everyone has kids. I mean, there's like when I tell them I'm 43 and not married and don't have children, they're all like confused. It like, doesn't make any, they're like, what? That doesn't make any sense at all, sir. The it's like they're talking to my mom, but but the so everyone has children, like everybody, and everyone is like even the doctors while they're operating, the nurses while they're working, everyone is always just thinking, how are we going to take care of our children? Everyone, and I literally mean every adult in Gaza, expects to die during this event. Everyone. there was just a report from the War Child Alliance. I can't remember when it came out, more than a month ago now, at least a few months ago, that showed that 96% of Gaza's children expect to die. That's very uncommon. That is. I mentioned this during the UN talk that I just gave at the Security Council. That is extremely uncommon. I have never. I mean, have you ever encountered a child that didn't expect to live? It's not even on no, what child is even thinking about this, right? But they've seen so many people die, and then it was 49%. The War Child Alliance found 49% of Gaza's children actually are suicidal. That's a wild number. I mean, that hasn't happened anywhere else. No one reported after the atomic bombing of Nagasaki that 50% of children were suicidal there. I mean, that's just wild. But so anyway, so there was an anesthesiologist named Nazar, chubby, happy kind of guy. He would play Santa Claus if he was if he was in a Christian country in December. And he has, I can't remember now, 5 or 6 boys. And he and I were just hanging out drinking coffee late at night like you do during Ramadan. And and people were just bantering back and forth, just the normal small talk that people do when nothing's going on. And he started joking about his wife. He said, my wife, she's so useless. She can't discipline the boys by herself. She can't go to the market by herself. She can't take the bus by herself. Just joking. He loves his wife very much, but he was just kidding. And then just literally as a joke, he just said, when I'm martyred, I don't know what she's going to do. And this is a common refrain. Like you hear people say this all the time. When I'm martyred, what I want you to do is blah blah blah. And they're not. I mean, they're kind of joking, but they're trying to make light of the situation. Let me say it's not really a joke. They're just trying to make light of the fact of the matter. And but sometimes you say something you don't really expect it to have the emotional effect that it does. And at that point, we looked at each other and he looked down at his coffee and he kind of buried his eyes in his coffee and his lips started to quiver and his voice shook a little bit. And he said, what kind of life is this? What are we living now? And actually, he just texted me the other day. I put it on Twitter when it happened, but he texted me the other day, and he said, I have a little boy, a 5-year-old boy named Keenan. And you think about a 5-year-old, basically his only conscious memories are of this war, right? Or war maybe not be the right term, but this event since October 7th. Uh, he said, I asked him which birds he knows, and his answers were drone, quadcopter, Apache, F-16, and F-35. I mean that yes, of course it's sad. Like I understand that this poor child doesn't know what he's saying. He doesn't understand the devastating response that he just gave to his father. But you know, for a parent, like I just mentioned, I don't have any children of my own, but for a parent to not be able to provide any modicum of safety, of comfort, like even of food to their kids, I mean that's what do people think that's going to lead to? I mean, it's not that hard to understand where this is going to go. I mean, if you can't just do this to people. The effect it's going to, and the Palestinians are a pretty gentle group of people in general. One of the kind of amazing things about the Palestinians is how long they took to resort to violence after the occupation started. But you can only like how does this enhance anybody's security in any kind of long-term way? I mean it's and this is where I just I don't I know I'm a doctor. I'm not really a politician, but you just kind of have to ask like is this really how people want? Like I know plenty of Israelis. They're not idiots. They're even right-wing Israelis. I don't know any of them that think this is making them safer. They've just kind of got it's just the conflict has gone on for so long that it's become Hatfields and McCoys that, yeah, well, they kill us, we kill them. That's life. What are you going to do? Everyone's just resigned to it. And then our own government comes along and for its own purposes just fuels it by just dumping weapons as fast as it can onto one side. And thank God it doesn't do it to both sides, but geez, but like just fueling the conflict. Actually, that happens to be the title of an Amnesty International report from like 2009, I think. I think it was after Operation Cast Lead. 15 years ago, people were talking, 16 years ago, people were talking about how the U.S. is, fueling conflict, but it's almost, in this case, it's literally true. We're sending the jet fuel, but you got to wonder how anyone thinks this is going to end other than in utter disaster for everybody. Uh, if the U.S. actually cared about Israel or Israelis or Jews at all, I think it's pretty obvious how we'd act. It's certainly not like this. Not us. I shouldn't say us. Our government, how our government would act.
Yeah. Feroze, thank you very, very much. There's a little end little outro I need to read, but before I do it, I just wanted to
Yeah.
say that, one of the things that Jews say to one another when there's sometimes in religious settings is when someone has done something good or, some kind of commandment, they say Yasher Koach, which literally means,
Hmm.
may God strengthen you. So
Hmm.
that's what I would say to you. May God strengthen you. I think it's an extraordinary thing that you, who have someone who lives in comfort in California, who could just as easily as anybody else turn off the TV and not pay attention to this, let alone leave your job and go and put yourself in serious risk of death or injury to go and work in circumstances that I have to believe were going to haunt you for the rest of your life. I don't know if you're a religious person, or I don't know where you got this inner fortitude and strength and sense of moral purpose, but I have to say it's deeply, deeply inspiring. So Yasher Koach.
Thank you.
Um, and thank you, Feroze, and thanks to our listeners for tuning into this episode of Occupied Thoughts. Please make sure to check out the FMEP website, fmep.org, for resources related to this podcast and lots of other great content related to Palestine and Israel. And please make sure you are subscribed to this podcast to stay up to date. And you can find us on iTunes, SoundCloud, or Spotify, and you can watch video versions of our podcast, including this one on YouTube. And with that, I'm Peter Beinart signing off until the next episode of Occupied Thoughts.